Canada has imposed export restriction on 23 critical minerals, materials that sit at the core of American manufacturing, defense systems, electric vehicles, and advanced technology. And the most important part of this story is not just that Canada acted, it's that Washington didn't see it coming. For decades, the relationship between Canada and the United States was built on an unspoken assumption that Canada would always be a stable, predictable, and cooperative supplier. Energy would flow south, minerals would flow freely, supply chain would remain uninterrupted. The United States built entire industrial strategies on that assumption. Electric vehicles manufacturing, aerospace production, military procurement, and semiconductor fabrication all quietly relied on Canadians' raw materials moving across the border without friction. That assumption is now broken. The foundation of the North American integrated economy has cracked, and the implications are only just beginning to the surface in the halls of power. The minerals affected by Canada's export restrictions are not symbolic, they are system critical. Think of them as the vitamins of the modern economy. You only need a small amount, but without them, the entire body shut down. First, there is lithium. It is the lifeblood of the green transition. Without Canadian lithium, the ambitious goals for American-made electric vehicle batteries are effectively dead in the water. Then there is cobalt, essential for the high-performance alloys used in jet engines and defense applications. Nickel, once seen as a simple industrial metal, is now the cornerstone of stainless steel and high-capacity batteries. And then there are the rare earth metals. These are the invisible backbone of the 21st century. They power missile guidance system, high-tech radar, AI chips, and advanced computing. Canada holds some of the largest reserve of these materials on Earth. The United States does not have immediate substitute, and as many experts are now warning, rebuilding domestic supply chain is not a short-term solution. It is a decade-long project. What makes this move so powerful is how quietly it happened. There was no dramatic announcement, no public warning shot. American mining firms were privately informed that export license would be reviewed. By the time Washington reacted publicly, the process was already underway. This decision didn't come out of nowhere. It is the result of a shift in Canadian leadership. According to the video, Canada's leadership had been watching a pattern develop in Washington. Sudden tariff announcements, policy reversals without warning, public threats followed by internal confusion. From Canada's perspective, the United States stopped behaving like a reliable economic partner. So Canada adjusted its strategy. Instead of arguing publicly or waiting for negotiation, Ottawa acted first. Long-term supply agreements were secured with the European Union, Japan, and South Korea. Minerals that once flowed almost automatically into the US markets were redirected overseas. That's not retaliation, but a calculated move to reduce dependence on an increasingly unpredictable partner. Washington's response only reinforced Canada's decision. Instead of stability or concession, the reaction was escalation. More tariff threats, more sanction language, more pressure. Once Canada locked in alternative buyers, the United States lost leverage. This is why the White House response backfired. The US was no longer negotiating from strength, it was reacting after the fact. Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney made the country's position unmistakably clear. Canada, he said, he would no longer subsidize nations that treat it as an economic vessel. Its resources are tied directly to national sovereignty, and that sovereignty is not negotiable. That language is not accidental. It reframes critical minerals as national security assets rather than simple trade commodities. And once resources are framed as sovereignty compromise becomes far more difficult. For the American defense industry, this is a nightmare scenario. The Pentagon relies on a steady stream of these minerals to maintain its technological edge, from the stealth coating on the F-35 to the magnets in advanced drone motors. The supply chain back leads to Canadian soil. When that supply becomes a political tool, the very readiness of the American military is called into question. Behind closed doors, US officials reportedly described the move as hostile, unprecedented, the most importantly irreversible in short term. The phrase matters because once supply chains are redirected, they do not simply snap back. Buyers are replaced, contracts are signed. This is a capability that Canada has been perfecting while the US focused elsewhere. That means higher production costs, tighter supply chains, increased vulnerability, and upward pressure on prices. Electric vehicles becomes more expensive, defense procurement becomes more constrained, semiconductor manufacturing faces new bottlenecks, infrastructure projects absorb higher input costs. This is not just a trade dispute. Countries that control raw materials now control leverage, and the balance of power is quietly moving away from finished goods producer towards resource holders. We are seeing a new form of resource nationalism that is smarter and more strategic than anything we saw in the 20th century. Canada is not acting alone, it's part of a growing movement of middle powers that realize their worth by pivoting toward the European Union. Japan and Canada had created a AAA alliance. This alliance of stable democracies prioritizes long-term planning over short-term political wins. This leaves the United States on the outside looking in, forced to deal with a new reality where its closest neighbor is no longer its most compliant supplier. The impact on the American worker and consumer will be felt slowly at first, then all at once. It starts with a delay in a new car model, then it moves to a price hike in consumer electronics. Eventually, it reaches the strategic level where the US government finds it cannot meet its own climate or defense goals because the raw materials are being shipped to Tokyo or Berlin instead of Detroit or Seattle. This is the mineral gap, and it is the most dangerous economic hurdle the United States has faced in decades. The shift has already happened. The era where the US could take its neighbor for granted is over. As the world transitions to a high-tech green energy economy, the value of what lies beneath the ground in the Canadian North has become the most valuable currency on the planet. Critical minerals are the new oil, and Canada has decided to control the tap. The only question left is whether the United States can humble itself to renegotiate a fair partnership, or if it will continue to react with anger while the damage to its industrial heartland becomes permanent.